Hi everyone, my name is Lee Pott. I'm the CEO of Wireless Innovation Forum and want to welcome you to the third of our Tech Talk series. Today's Tech Talk is celebrating the dawn of mobile cellular communications technology, the first portable cell phone call 50 years ago, and it's being given by Marty Cooper. A couple of administrative notes before we get started. Any slides that are presented today will be posted on the webinars page. It's www.wirelessinnovation.org/webinars. And we have permission to record the webinar, so it'll be on the recorded webinars page, youtube.com/c/the Wireless Innovation Forum. If you have any questions at all about how to find information on this webinar, please feel free to contact me at lee.pucker@wirelessinnovation.org, and I'll be happy to respond to you. During today's webinar, if you have a question for any of the speakers, please go ahead and type the question into the questions window on your GoToWebinar application, and then I will pass those on to the session moderators. So speaking of session moderators, I want to introduce the moderators for today. Andy Clegg. Andy is the Spectrum Engineering Lead from Google, and he's also the elected Chief Technology Officer for the Wireless Innovation Forum. And then also Rich Lee. Rich is the Chief Executive Officer of iPOSI, and iPOSI is a member of the Wireless Innovation Forum. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy. Andy?
Yeah, thanks very much, Lee, and welcome to everybody. This is the third in a series of tech talks that are sponsored by the Wireless Innovation Forum. We don't schedule the tech talks on a regular basis. Instead, we do it on an opportunistic basis when we encounter some of the most innovative of wireless innovations that we'd like to present. We started them last year. The first one was on quantum receivers given by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, a fascinating technology that would revolutionize wireless if it could be commercialized, and they're still working on that. The second Tech Talk was held in November, and we focused on an upcoming LTE network that is being deployed on the moon to experiment with, what we would do for wireless communications as we colonize beyond the Earth. And then this third opportunity came up, and as Lee alluded to, we are approaching in a couple of weeks exactly the 50th anniversary of the very first portable call made by a cellular phone, made on a cellular phone, which was developed and the call placed by Marty Cooper, who we're extremely honored to have talk today at this third Tech Talk. So before we hand it over to Marty, I'd like to introduce Rich Lee, CEO of iPOSI, which Lee had introduced briefly earlier. Rich has been a longtime colleague and acquaintance of Marty's. They go back quite a ways. And so we thought it was appropriate to do some co-hosting today. So Rich is going to help with the co-host tasks today. So I'm going to turn it over to Rich, and Rich is going to introduce Marty. So take it away, Rich.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Well, first of all, it's my honor to introduce to many of you on this call from all over the world, I understand, to introduce you to Marty Cooper, the father of the cell phone. I've known Marty personally over 40 years while we were both at Motorola in those days when he developed and brought this to market. And we'll talk more about those details. But Marty's also a serial entrepreneur and innovator that continues to this day, along with his wife, Arlene, who's also an inventor, serial entrepreneur in her own right. So Marty's got a lot of DNA from the wireless industry. I'd also like to point out, Marty is a member of the Marconi Society. He has something to do with many of you on this call in that he's a lifetime member of the National Academy of Engineering and a lifetime well, more than a lifetime, is inducted into the Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame. Time magazine found the cell phone to be among, that Marty invented and developed, among the top 100 inventions in history. Marty brought, and we'll be touching on this because all of you are dealing with how to bring new innovation to the market. And in about, he'll give the exact time, but in a very short period of time, he took, with his elite team, a big leap in 1973, 50 years ago. And by the way, I started at Motorola 50 years ago, and we didn't have integrated circuits. We had primitive NiCad batteries. We had, very elemental components in those days. Nevertheless, they courageously brought to market the first cell phone, and I'll show you that. And they made calls demonstrating it. And somewhat, there's a backstory here taunting one of the rivals to Motorola, AT&T, who believed in cellular, but that cellular was about car phones, not about the human factor of a portable cell phone that you would have on your person. And history, I think, has decided which way that went. Marty's commitment to human engineering is profound. He had some of the best industrial design and RF wireless engineering teams to boot, so he could focus on that in a way that I think we're all envious of. And he'll talk more about that. Today, that innovation led to over 6 billion. Before the call started, Andy and I found that 5.8 billion unique wireless subscribers exist today. 100% of them are on a smartphone, a handheld portable phone. So this is a game changer in the history of electronics, certainly wireless, and we're going to turn it back over to you, Andy, I believe, and you're going to bring this to bear within your forum. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rich. And so actually, we'll turn it right over to Marty. And Marty, we're all yours. We're all ears. We'd love to hear a little bit of the story about developing and using the first portable phone. There's a lot of people online that weren't even alive when that happened, and a lot of people who don't necessarily know all of the history behind it. I'm sure you've told the history many times, but there's a lot of people online who haven't heard it, and we're very interested in hearing from you and giving us a little bit of background on that, and also any of the other innovations you've been involved with. So over to you, Marty, and again, we're honored to have you here today, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Andy. It's my honor to be here, and thank you for that nice introduction, Rich. You pretty much covered everything I was going to say, but I'll think of something else to talk about. I think Rich introduced the subject very well. I'm not sure that those of you youngsters realize how primitive things were 50 years ago. We had no digital cameras. The integrated circuit had just been invented, and it wasn't very integrated. The internet didn't really exist. So here we were in a situation where the bell system, you guys don't remember the bell system. The bell system was a monopoly. The bell, if you wanted a telephone, you could only buy it from the bell system. In fact, you couldn't buy it. You had to rent it from the bell system. And the bell system has come up with a concept called cellular telephony. This occurred in 1947. Somebody wrote a memo at Bell Laboratories. They concluded the memo by saying, most of what we just said is obvious, that you could have cellular, you could get an increase in spectral efficiency by using small cells and repeating spectrum use within a specific area like a city. They didn't mention in that menu the requirement for handoff, but the guy who came up with the idea in the first place did correct that very shortly thereafter. And it took some 20 years before the Bell system, this monopoly, decided they could implement this. Their view of the market for handheld cell phones, for any kind of cell phone, was perhaps, well, they did a study. And the conclusion of the consultant that did this study was that the world market for cell phones was approximately 1 million. Total market forever would be 1 million. Turns out, by the way, they were right, because the proposal of the Bell system and the original memo was based upon car telephones. We at Motorola didn't believe them. We believe that the car making the car telephone a replacement for the wired telephone really was a meaningless thing. We've been trapped in our homes and tied to our desks by that copper wire for 120 years or so. And now they were going to trap us in our car. It didn't make any sense to us at all. We thought the time was ready for the freedom that you get from being able to move anywhere and talk anytime on a personal phone that was an extension of yourself. And so we took the Bell system on. They were the biggest company in the world, and we were a tiny company in Chicago. But our management had the vision to support my effort to change the mind of the government to move from car telephones to portable phones. And at the end of 1972, it looked like the FCC, who was the decision maker in this thing, the FCC would decide who could use the radio spectrum. And they were about to make a decision. We were really worried that they would allow this monopoly to become a monopoly in cellular telephony. That was just unacceptable to us. And we were also concerned that the FCC would legitimize car telephones. And we thought that would be terrible. And so we prepared to do a big demonstration in Chicago, in Washington, to let our lawmakers and the FCC know that there was another viewpoint. And I approached the management and said, giving a lecture to people about two-way radios will only exhibit a yawn. For years, I had been trying to explain to my mother what I did for a living. And I have to tell you, the two-way radios did not get her excited. She would much have preferred that I was a lawyer or a doctor or a judge. So I gave up on two-way radios. It turns out that the handheld portable was exciting. It was interesting to people, and I think we had a substantial impact. And as you know, the result, as Rich pointed out very eloquently, most of the people in the world today have a cell phone. But I have to tell you that it is my view that what we did 50 years ago was an introduction. That we have been in what I call the game stage. We don't really know how to use cell phones yet, but the future is going to teach us some important lessons. It is my view that we will have revolutions in education and healthcare, that the concept of collaboration is going to change, and it has already changed to a very large degree. So we are just at the very beginning of the cell phone revolution. There are people that suggest that we don't have enough spectrum to do all this. And I don't agree with that at all. There are people that are talking about using millimeter waves and terahertz waves. It is my view that we have not even started to use the lower frequency bands in an effective way. that there is more than adequate spectrum capacity, and I hope we get to talk about that a little later. But let me repeat, the cellular revolution is just beginning.
Thank you. Well, so I'm going to ask you another, what technologists and engineers tend to call a soft side question, because you very much have focused on not the bits and bytes, but the what can this do for mankind, for humanity. I want you to share a moment on your view, because you're setting the stage here. We're only at the beginning of the cell phone revolution. What would the cell phone revolution in your mind look like 20, 30 years from now? What would we accomplish as a society, and how this will benefit society?
Well, let me start with a comment, Rich, in response to that excellent question. There is a view of technology that I strongly disagree with, and that is the view that technology is the science, the gadgetry, the experiments, and that is not the case. My definition of technology is that technology is the application of science to create products and services that make the human experience better. If you take humanity out of the equation, it's not technology, it's curiosity, it's gadgetry, but the challenge of we engineers is to make the human experience better, to improve humanity, and that was that's the intent of every engineer's job. So what's going to happen in the future? I hope we get to talk about this later, but the educational system is in deep trouble at the moment. Just imagine a teacher getting up and lecturing to students, and every student has access to all of the knowledge in the world. They also have access to all the misinformation in the world, but having a teacher give facts to a student is a waste of time. They already have access to all the facts. So somehow we're going to have to learn how to teach our children how to use this information, how to discriminate between good information and bad information, and move on from there. And if we do that, if we would improve the educational experience, then we will find out what is already happening. That is that our children are going to be smarter than we are. Their brains will have been exercised more than we are. They will have a much better head start than we ever did. The healthcare system is in deep trouble today. Why is that? Because we are putting all this effort into curing diseases. The right way to approach healthcare is to intercept diseases before they happen. And the cell phone, the ability to connect people full time, has the potential to do that. We already have sensors that can be placed on the body, that can be embedded in the body, that can measure virtually everything on the human body. And in doing so, we are coming up on the ability to anticipate disease. To sense when you are about to have a stroke, as an example. We can do that today. We can sense that a person is on the verge of having a stroke, and immediately get them to pop a pill, see a doctor, do whatever it takes to stop that and save a life. When you talk, Rich, about 20 or 30 years, it may take 2 generations before we can sense a cancer cell, but at some point that's going to happen. That we'll have a sensor in your body that will note that your immune system has gotten out of control, that there are cancer cells starting to multiply, and we zap those cells, and cancer is no longer a disease. Can you imagine that? a society that is free of disease. And the other thing that I consider to be a shame of our society is that poverty exists today. We have enough food in the world to feed everybody. There is no reason for anybody to be hungry, and yet we haven't yet learned how to distribute that food. We haven't. There are literally billions of people that we categorize as poor in the world today. And I think there is a potential for the cell phone combined with the internet, combined with lots of other technologies to eliminate poverty. So there is the future. The cell phone is not the sole element of that, but it is certainly the glue that keeps everything together.
So Marty, this is Andy. I have a quick question to throw in here. You talk in the future about the possible role of cellular phones, cellular technology in saving people's lives by being able to know when a health problem is about to occur. But have you personally ever looked back and thought about the number of lives that your invention has saved over 50 years by virtue of people being able to call for help on a cell phone? Have you, as you know, that must dawn on you sometime about the number of people's lives that you've saved over the decades.
Well, of course, I didn't mean to imply that the cell phone hasn't made a contribution. People are pretty smart. There's no way you could persuade 6 billion people to buy a cell phone if it didn't provide some positive impact to their families. And of course, I have 3 great-grandchildren. I don't want to brag about it at this moment. Of course, they're all exceptional. But my grandchildren have all had cell phones when they were very young because their parents have always been working parents. They have to pick up the kids after school, and just having these children have the ability to make a phone call if their mother or father are not there when they're ready to go alone is a valuable asset. So the cell phone's already done a great deal in terms of increasing productivity, making people feel more comfortable. My only suggestion is those things are all indicators of what the magnificent future is going to be. If you haven't figured it out by now, Andy, I'm an optimist.
Yes.
But on the other hand, the facts support my optimism. If you think about it today, we are wealthier, healthier than society as a whole than ever before. There is less poverty. The human experience is better today than it has ever been before. The idea, though, is that we've got a long way to go to be where we ought to be.
Yeah, and Andy, that's a great point. E911 calls, you would probably know the exact number. I'm going to say it's in the 4 or 5 million a year in the U.S. of that order. And how many of those were instrumental in saving lives or lessening damage or all kinds of good things? And that must have been in your vision. But hey, Marty, I'm going to throw you a little bit of for this audience, more on the hard side. You're a thinker, some would say, those of us like Andy, myself, nerds in the spectrum, thinking about spectrum in the engineering equation. You serve on the TAC of the FCC. Have we used all the spectrum? Is there a limit? Do you buy that? And if there is a limit, I mean, what does that portend? But I think I know you're going to say it's not as limited as it's otherwise viewed right now.
There is a myth that there is scarcity of spectrum. I have seen no evidence of that. My observation is right from the beginning of the time that commercial radio was introduced. I guess Marconi did that around the turn of the century, not this last turn, the turn before, in 1900, the demand for spectrum has increased enormously since then, but somehow anytime anybody had a new concept, whether it was AM radio, FM radio, television, and more recently cellular, we've always found the spectrum to do that. And I examined that in great detail and came up with what I call the law of spectrum capacity. And what I discovered is that looking at specific points over the past 120 years or so, that the capacity of the usable spectrum has doubled every 30 months, every 2.5 years, every 30 months for the last 120 years. For those of you that are good at mathematics, you've already figured out that that's 10 trillion times increase in capacity over 120 years. I've also spent a lot of time thinking about what the technologies are that we have yet to use to increase spectrum capacity. And there's reason to believe that we got enough technology that we have not used yet that will increase the capacity of the spectrum at that same rate for another 50 years or so, another trillion times increase. So the challenge is not spectrum scarcity, it's the ability to adjust our society to use the spectrum more efficiently and to take advantage of all of the things that the spectrum, this radio spectrum can do for us.
Marty, we do have an audience question, and I'd like to remind others in the audience to please feel free to type an question into the chat that we can pass on to Marty. But the question is, what do you think of today's engineering and scientific education? There seems to be a lack of graduates from the United States to keep this momentum going, development of science and engineering technology. What's your view on the current state of engineering and scientific education in the U.S.?
Well, I serve on the board of trustees of the Illinois Institute of Technology, and at least from that narrow viewpoint, I think we still have some extraordinary universities in the U.S. In fact, I think the best technical universities in the world are in the U.S. And so you may suggest that the total volume of engineers being produced may be not as great in this country. I know that in China, they have made a specific issue of putting a lot of youngsters through school. It's one thing to talk about the value of engineers and another the quality of education. And the thing that I observed, I just attended a lecture by the president of the University of Arizona. It's incredible to see what has gone on in our universities in trying to make engineering, as I mentioned before, useful to humanity, to increase not only the volume of engineering, but the quality of engineering education. And I think we're still doing a pretty good job. Should we get more children interested in science and technology? Of course, but you've got to start out with an educational system that is effective, efficient at producing engineers who are creative, who understand the aspect of technology and humanity. And in order to get people to be creative, you have to have a creative environment. And people complain about the chaotic political environment in the United States. To me, chaos is an example of freedom. I believe in self-organizing systems. self-organized, or if I learn how to say self-organizing, I do a lot better. Self-organizing systems are the only way that you ever achieve an optimum in anything. And what I mean by that is you've got a system that is self-correcting. You start out with chaos. The system keeps improving. There is no one person, one entity that is telling you what the objective is. The objective is perfection. And the only way you get a system that is self-organizing like that is having a free environment. And we do pretty well at that these days. People talk about India, which has some superb universities, but when you examine the details, it's the environment that counts. Because in India, the reason the universities are so good is that the students are teaching each other. The population of India, as you know, is well over 1 billion people. And when you take a small percentage of those people and send them to the universities, they end up with being the best and the brightest. And in India, they teach each other, and they have produced a wonderful product of great students. So I have to repeat, it's the free environment that will make that happen. As I say, I think we're doing pretty well. We have to encourage more of our youngsters to appreciate the impact of engineering and science to society. But once again, I'm being optimistic, Andy.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Marty. We have another audience question. I should ask it while we can, and this is more into the nuts and bolts, which is also many of the engineers online find interesting. The question could be, could you comment, or the question is, could you comment about the form factor and technology in your first cell phone? Jimmy Durante of Motorola used to tell stories that he carried the first cell phone in his back in a huge backpack with other components occupying both hands. Was this the case, or was the first phone more of a repackaged trunk radio? And I have a related nuts and bolts question, and that is, what was the frequency, or at least the frequency band, that you used for that first cell phone, portable phone call?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me show you what this first phone looked like. This is an exact model of the phone. This phone only talked and listened. Had a battery life of 25 minutes of talk time. It was not a problem. You couldn't hold it up for 25 minutes. It was so heavy. It was at 900 megahertz. At that time, we had not used any frequency for mobile purposes higher than 450 megahertz, and we were struggling at 450 megahertz. And so I have an anecdote that I hesitate to tell you, but it may sound like Motorola was chaotic at the time. But there was a moment in Washington where I was calling upon the FCC to tell them 900 megahertz is the future. This is where we were going. And meanwhile, our sales department, along with our system engineers, were talking to another part of the FCC, telling them that the 900 megahertz will never work. 450 was as high as you could go. This is not a made-up anecdote. It was literally at the same day, the same lunch as those two events occurred. Fortunately, our management did support the fact that we could do 900 megahertz. But by the way, I remember Jimmy Durante very well. He passed away some years ago, but and he was not the Jimmy Durante actor. He was a classic engineer and a very strong contributor. But this phone was really not a very reproducible product. It was a demonstration. And was it a shrunken car telephone? Well, yeah, I suppose you could say that. Our two-way radios at that time were talk and listen. They were not duplex, but we were making duplex telephones. The duplexer in that phone was about twice the size of a modern cell phone. So just the idea of taking that duplexer and squeezing it down and fitting it into this box, that was a remarkable achievement. We went to our semiconductor division and took one of the very first large-scale integrated circuits, general purpose integrated circuits, because we needed that to make the synthesizer. We'd never made a mobile radio with more than 6, 8, 10 channels. To demonstrate that we could make a cellular phone, this monster had 460 channels available. That was the first time that had been done. It was the first time people had used 900 megahertz, the 900 megahertz band. And that being the case, we had to create devices that could both receive and transmit at that frequency. Even the antenna was an engineering challenge to make a 900 megahertz antenna. So you could say that we did that, all we did was take a mobile car phone and squeeze it down into this box. But that turned out to be quite an engineering achievement. And the team that did that, from the time that I had the idea for doing this demonstration, from the time that I went to our industrial designers and said, hey guys, we're going to make a cellular telephone. And their response was, what's a cellular telephone? And the way Rudy Krolap, the guy that ran our design thing, tells the story now, I don't believe this story, but he says, I picked up the telephone and a pair of scissors and cut the wire and said, that's a portable telephone. So from the time that I talked to Rudy, he assigned his entire staff of designers to come up with versions of what a cellular telephone would look like. They did an amazing job. These guys, without ever having seen or have a working unit, created a flip phone, a sliding phone, a lozenge phone. It's just, and by the way, Rich did mention my book, but there's a picture of all of these different versions of the phone. From the time that these designers came up with these pictorial, you didn't have to do that right now, Rick. You don't want to advertise the book. To the time they had a demonstrable unit was 3 months. To me, that was the engineering achievement of the century. When I approached the head of the engineering group, Don Linder, his comment was, I don't think it's possible. I'll try, but I can't guarantee you can do it. And I used my superb management technique, which in that case was I gave him a big hug and said, Don, I know you can do it. And guess what he did? I talked to him around the end of 1972, and by March of 1973, he had a working handheld portable cell phone.
So what was the total time scale between your idea for portable, hand portable, to making that first public portable phone call? What was the total? Was that a year?
Just over 3 months, Andy.
Wow.
So we had already planned that April 3rd event in New York, and that was a non-movable date. And we had stopped all engineering in the division, and people were making 900 megahertz two-way radios just to prove to the FCC and to the Congress that 900 megahertz was usable, and that the Bell system was not the only one that could do that. So the April 3rd date was a fixed date. We had to make it, and with the genius efforts of Don Linder and his team, and including Jimmy Durante, they succeeded.
We have another audience question that I'll ask real fast, Rich, and then we'll pass it back to you. Someone is wondering if, Marty, if you have an amateur radio license.
No, I didn't. I really tried very hard, Andy, but in those days, in order to get an amateur radio license, you have to be skilled at using a key and doing Morse code and be able to listen and decode Morse code. And it turns out I'm a klutz. I just never could operate that key. I could never decode the sum. I can't tell you how hard I tried to become an amateur, but the bottom line is I just couldn't do it. And all of my engineering happened in the laboratories at Motorola. I have to point out that Motorola is my second job. My first job was at a company called Teletype. Doesn't exist anymore. They made teleprinters that were 100% mechanical. They had a motor was the only electrical part, no electronics. They were mechanical marvels. And I didn't want to be a mechanical engineer, and they hired me to do research at a mechanical company, and they were giving lip service to electronics, and Motorola came along, and here I was, a digital guy at Motorola, and Motorola was in the RF business. And it turns out that digital was the way of the future. And if you take a look at a modern cell phone, it's almost 100% digital, or a couple of RF devices. So somehow that characterized my career. I was the outlier, but fortunately I was the outlier in what the future turned out to be.
Well, if you had stayed there, would we all be using wireless portable teletypes now instead of cell phones?
Well, I don't know about that, Andrew. There are some things you just know that were going to happen regardless of who did it. So there's no doubt in my mind that somebody would have come up with a portable telephone. But let me tell you what the contribution of our group really was. If the Bell system had been successful, they would have designed and built a car telephone system that was built around 20-watt mobiles. The transmitter power of the cell sites would have been 40 to 100 watts. The cells would have been enormous. You couldn't use portable phones in an environment like that. So I would suggest that if the Bell system had invested some $1 billion or so in building a cell system for car telephones, it would have been a number of years before they would reverse, or somebody else would make that kind of investment to do portables. So I have to give a lot of credit to the Motorola management that they literally bet their company. It was $1 billion company. They bet the company. They spent $100 million over a period of 10 years or so, battling this huge monopoly and almost losing. But fortunately for society as a whole, we did succeed, and we got cell phones.
Okay, Marty, I think this will be probably the final question. I want to go back to the soft side. There's 150 folks on the call right now. In that audience, I'll bet there's the next Marty or Martina Cooper. What advice would you give them, all these innovators on this call, that you learned from bringing, not only the first cell phone, not only 12, 13 weeks of prototype development, you persuaded, and you had folks around you helping persuade, the management to invest $100 million in 1973 to 1983 dollars. Over that 10-year period, 1983 being marked as the first year cellular became commercial. So you had 10 years before, you had to persuade all these folks, you had to persuade the FCC. What advice would you give them? And as the folks on this call are dealing with 5G, 6G, Wi-Fi 6, 7, and a number of other wireless innovations, what advice would you give them?
Well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to give people advice. You know, I am an engineer, but I have several things that have affected my life strongly. One was the first thing I learned when I joined Motorola was a comment that the founder of Motorola made, which was, "Do not fear failure, reach out." I took that very seriously. As a result of that, I had a huge number of failures. I don't like to talk about my failures, but fortunately, I had enough successes that Motorola tolerated me for 30 years. But the concept of reaching out, of taking chances, is crucial. The second thing is to remember the comment I made before, that the essence of technology is humanity. If you're not solving human problems, it's not technology. And the third one, which may be the most important, is everybody is entitled. I don't believe in entitlements, but everybody is entitled to wake up in the morning and look forward to what they're going to do during the day, to be passionate about what their work is. And if somebody is stuck in a job where they don't feel passionate, where they're not engaged, they ought to go do something else. The feeling, the thing that keeps my life going, and it has for, I don't like to talk about how old I am, but you guys all know I'm 94 years old anyway. The concept of having an idea may not be totally original, but it's original to you, is the most exciting thing in my life. It really is. I hope we get to talk a little bit about spectrum, because that's what I've been thinking about most in the past years. But that is, I would like everybody to be as excited about the future as I am, and excited about what they can do about the future. The opportunities today for the kids that are getting out of college are greater than they have ever been before. There are just so many ways to go, so many solutions that need more work, that anybody that can't find something that they can be passionate about is not trying hard.
Great, thanks, Marty. We do have other questions coming in, so let's see if we can get to the questions. The cell phone has also revolutionized photography. Everyone now carries a high-resolution camera in their pocket. Did you anticipate the extent to which the applications would flow in the use of cell phones?
Not a chance. You know, I like to think that I'm a visionary. I'm trying very hard, and we haven't got to. Well, I guess we did talk about my visions for the future about healthcare and education. But back in 1972, as you point out, Andy, cameras were huge things. You had to develop, you had to put film in the camera. You guys, most of you don't even know what film is, and then process and do stuff. But I was just at the Mobile Congress in Barcelona, and these photographers are up there, and they're every time they would push the button, they take 30 pictures. Bang, 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 bang. And so, you know, the whole concept of photography was different. The internet, as I said before, had not been invented yet. So the idea of using your cell phone for research. We did know about data though. We did have paging. So putting, in essence, messages into a cell phone was a very obvious thing very soon. But all the rest of it, we could not have managed. Having said that, the story that we told at that time, and this, I'm really serious, we said that someday when you were born, you would be assigned a phone number. If you didn't answer the phone, you would die. Well, think about that. We have almost achieved that today. 2/3 of the people on Earth have cell phone subscriptions. There are more cell phone subscriptions in the world than there are people. At least in that regard, we were visionaries, but we did not anticipate all these other technologies.
Well, it's interesting you talked about the visionary part, because the next question is that vision looking forward. So do you have a projection? You talked about this a little bit earlier, but do you have a projection on how mobile will evolve and look in 20 years, 50 years, in terms of form factor, integrated technologies, etc.? And also, somewhat related, but going back a little bit too, one of the questioners is interested if you have a comment on the evolution from the first cell phone, which was analog, through to digital technologies and what we've made out of digital technologies today.
Well, let me start with the cell phone itself. And I ought to point out that being a futurist is really easy if you don't put numbers on it. So I'm not going to talk about what year these things are going to happen. But the cell phone is already becoming an extension of the person. Wouldn't you say that? That one way or another, most of us, some maybe to high degree, are becoming dependent upon the cell phone. We spend a lot of time looking at the cell phone. Some people who look at the cell phone while they're crossing the street, they're a little crazy. But the cell phone is suboptimal. In fact, I would suggest that it's terrible. The whole idea of taking a flat piece of plastic and glass and putting it against your round head, holding your hand up in an awkward position, or else sticking stuff in your ears so that you could move the cell phone away. All of that is about to be, it's unnatural. So what's the cell phone of the future going to look like? Well, let's start out with charging. The idea, the inconvenience of charging up your cell phone, charging up your earbuds if you use them, charging up your watch, charging any sensors that you got. It's very awkward. And think about it, the human body is a charger. You ingest food, the food turns into energy. Can't we tap off a little of that energy? And so I see the future cell phone ultimately as being attached to your body. Sooner or later, it's going to be embedded in your body. And it's certainly not going to be embedded as a big hunk of battery and electronics. It's going to be optimized devices. So it's very easy to conceive of the optimum telephone. Kind of ironic that we still call this supercomputer that I've got in here, we call this thing a telephone, but it still does function as a phone from time to time. And the optimum phone would be embedded probably near your ear, because you want to have a minimum amount of power going into your ear. It will embrace a powerful computer to whom you can speak. When I want to talk to you, Andy, I just say, give me Andy on the phone. The thing will say, which Andy do you want? Do you want the Andy in Silicon Valley that you know, or the Google Andy? And I say, yeah, let me talk to the Google Andy Clegg. And there I am talking to you. To me, that's an optimum telephone. There is a future if we think about enough generations where I will only have to think Andy, and there he will be. So, but you now move on to healthcare, and you will have, there are already sensors. As an example, I just talked to somebody 2 nights ago at a company that makes pacers, heart pacers. And they know how to put a sensor in your body that can sense whether you're going to have a stroke. It measures your blood pressure, your temperature, and numerous other things. And it can anticipate. This is today, not the future. That can anticipate the oncoming of a stroke. So all we have to do now in the future is check people out, look at their DNA, look at their measurements, and the whole concept of an annual physical examination, which turns out to be worthless in the first place. The diseases don't wait once a year to come on. So we can do a physical examination every 30 seconds and sense whether any disease is coming on. I think I mentioned that earlier, and zap that disease before it happens. So the things that I talk about are not imaginative. They are happening already. What we have to do is somehow do the engineering to come up with these things, make them cost effective. It is a shame to me that today, when cell phones are so important in education, they're so important in healthcare, that 50% of our students do not have access to the internet. Why is that? Well, either they don't have coverage. Don't tell me that this country has 99% coverage. That's in the advertising. But something like 70% of our students do not have coverage. And a huge percentage of them can't afford it. Did you know that the United States has the highest cost cellular service in the world? Maybe twice as much as the cell phone service in Europe. And that is a shame. I could talk about why that happened, but we're going to use up the whole time. We haven't got the spectrum yet. I hope we're going to get to talk about spectrum. But there is no excuse for that. We have to figure out how to adapt our cell phones to individuals. We have to learn how to come up with an internet that is suitable for students, that doesn't contain the misinformation and pornography that exists on our general internet, and have an internet for education. Why not? Isn't education the most important thing that we do? So once again, you know, everything that I've talked about is not technology. The technology can make it happen, but it's got to do with the human experience. So much potential, and somehow we're not doing a great job at it now. I hope we, in fact, I know we're going to improve that in the future.
Great. So Lee is pushing me to wrap up because we're getting close to the last couple of minutes.
We never got to talk about spectrum.
No, I was just going to say, Marty, actually, that's my, that's what I like the most as well. So I'm going to take the host prerogative, and Rich, I'm sure you'd want to hear about this as well. But can you say a few words on the spectrum side, because we deal with that all the time at the Wireless Innovation Forum. So we would like, even if we have to go over a couple of minutes, we would like to hear your thoughts on the spectrum side of this.
Well, I just want to repeat the comment I made earlier, that there has never been a scarcity of spectrum, and there never need be. But we are going to have to do things differently. Somehow the focus on, and you mentioned that, Andy, about 4G, 5G, 6G, our focus has been more on technical things than it has been on human things. I just wonder whether we haven't gone astray in that regard. We know there are techniques for improving spectral capacity, for improving spectral efficiency. Smart antennas, as an example, that will multiply the effects of the spectrum. Why aren't we using those at the lower frequencies? Instead, what we're putting is an enormous amount of intellectual effort on millimeter waves, when millimeter waves serve a very narrow part of the market that can be served much better, more efficiently at lower frequencies. Yes, someday we ought to do millimeter waves. Yes, doing the research and getting started on millimeter waves is an appropriate thing to do, but we have lost the balance. We should be using spectrum improving technology at lower frequencies because it's lower in cost at those frequencies, and because it will allow us to implement some of these human-oriented needs of society faster than has happened before. In preparation for this thing, and the reason I didn't sleep all night, it was I made a long list of all the technologies that are not being used today that should be. Smart antennas is one of them. I don't want to do a commercial for Rich Lee, but Rich and iPosi have come up with technology that can create, in essence, a topological picture of the world showing where coverage can be improved, where the, well, I just have to mention this. All of you are familiar with the way people describe cellular. The name cellular implies cells. Well, the world does not consist of cells. Maybe the human body does, but there are no hexagons or circles. You know, the Bell Labs guys started out with circles, and then there are people that succeeded them came up with hexagons. The way the coverage has evolved, and with the kind of things that iPosi is doing, is the coverage areas are based upon what exists in the world, what the topography of the world looks like, where the buildings are, and you end up with cells being customized to the world, not having a pattern of cells placed upon the world. So when I talk about we're only at the beginning, yes, I think we ought to go to 6G, but 6G ought to be focused on coverage and cost. We have to serve everybody, and it has to be affordable. And if you do those two things, we will end up changing the human experience in really meaningful ways.
Great thoughts, Marty. Thanks. Rich, do you have any final question or comments for Marty?
Well, no, I'm so appreciative of WINForum and your work, Andy, and pulling together. I called it earlier the soft side and the hard side. This is how engineering and the art of engineering evolves, and it's a very important area, and we're all applying this to the coming generations. These generations, however, would not be as advanced as they are today had it not been for Marty and his team at Motorola, who may have jump-started us all 20 years. So we're very appreciative to Marty and what you've contributed here, Marty. And hopefully it'll inspire a lot of other 20-year jump starts here. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Andy and Rich, I can't tell you how honored I am to have this interaction with you. I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get into any arguments. I would love to know there are places where we could have disagreed and made things much more interesting. But giving me this opportunity to spout off was very neat. I hope that under a different venue we could get into the arguments and stimulate each other, because that is how we're going to make progress, is by having different viewpoints. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Marty. We're honored to have you, and thank you for taking the time. Back over to you, Lee, and thanks again, Marty.
Sure. So just a final thanks for everyone. Thanks to you, Andy and Rich as well for moderating. And we'll be looking to post this later if people want to refer back to it. Thanks so much for your time, Dr. Cooper, and look forward to seeing what happens next.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marty.